ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Well, violence isn't the only issue in the digital universe right now. If you're online or scrolling through social media, how can you tell the information you're getting is the real deal? Online misinformation and disinformation is a pressing challenge, and it can have real-world consequences, including on health messaging and your health directly. You only need to cast your mind back to the height of the pandemic to remember the vast amounts of information, not always true, being plastered online. It's a big topic experts will be canvassing at an event in Melbourne this week, including Dr. Brett Sutton, the Director of Health and Biosecurity at CSIRO. He's also the former Victorian Chief Health Officer, and Dr. Brian Lee Han Wong, a digital health consultant and global public health advisor who's worked with the WHO and the Public Health England, to name a few. I'd like to welcome you both to Drive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brett, I might just start with you. We know that mis and disinformation is a huge problem online. How much are we seeing now, including, in the health space, and where is it coming from?
I think it's pretty substantially seen in the health space now as well. Look, it comes from all kinds of players. I guess there are individuals who are trying to influence opinion in terms of clicks. Social media companies are helping to drive that. And there are those with sometimes hidden, sometimes obvious commercial interests who are also playing pretty heavily in the space. But I think it's only going to be more and more substantial over time. Can
you give us a few more specifics as to what it can actually look like, an example or two of what kinds of threats and even trends that we're seeing right now?
Oh, look, there's a lot in the space of diet. There's a lot in the space of aesthetics or cosmetics. So, the things that people are maybe more vulnerable to in terms of following advice that they can't necessarily check. It's very appealing kind of promotion that comes to them. And, some of the products that are touted out there, melanotan 2 was one that was touted as giving you a tan as well as weight loss. Cambo has been promoted as a kind of health retreat and detox. And there are many others that are really focused on young people, I think, in particular, and those who are really willing to part with their money in order to try and achieve health or some kind of shortcut in terms of how they look and how they feel.
And what are some of the immediate impacts of this type of messaging online and what they're having on, health messaging and our health more directly?
I think there's two issues to separate. One is social media generally, which is becoming more and more the routine channel for health information and news more broadly. But there's also the way that AI or artificial intelligence and machine learning is developing in the space, which is a separate issue. So on the social media side, I think it's just a case that it becomes much more difficult to understand how to stratify, how to work out what are the trusted sources of information and what's information that's being promoted and amplified for nefarious reasons or for hidden commercial reasons that might be harmful to individuals. And then on the artificial intelligence side, there's lots of good that will happen in the health space because of AI, but it is going to challenge us at the same time because it'll be much more difficult to understand what is even true and real in the world that's being communicated versus completely made up or completely manufactured deep fakes that will sometimes involve what look like influencers or what look like ordinary and well-known personalities to us promoting something that has no foundation in reality whatsoever.
Yeah, it's just frightening, isn't it? Because it is very hard to discern some of those deep fakes, etc. Brian, in a world where social media is very much the norm, and Brett, touched on youth just a little bit earlier, I think the stats are something like 70% of teens use Instagram and more than half of TikTok's Australian users are now aged under 24. How at risk are young people to being exposed to mis and disinformation online, and how is it impacting them generally?
Well, thanks, Catherine, and greetings from Melbourne. So I think young people are at significant risk, particularly when navigating digital spaces and using social media. Particularly due to their exposure to misinformation and targeted advertising of harmful products, as Brett has alluded to, I think these platforms can also really affect their mental health and contribute to various issues such as anxiety, depression, things around body image concerns. And I think, the really interactive and addictive nature of social media really amplifies these risks as it constantly exposes young users to, peer opinions, popular media that might not always portray healthy lifestyles or, realistic body images, for instance.
Do you feel like it's almost getting away or gotten away from us? It's just all those stats that I just spoke to you of shows how many young people are online who are getting a lot of their information here online. Does it feel like the horse is almost bolted?
Yeah, I think it is easy to kind of think of that in that way. But I mean, governance is always, for instance, playing catch up with the pace of change of tech and social media platforms. But I'm a cautious optimist, so I'd like to think that there's still hope. And I think there is hope if we're able to kind of help build this digital literacy of young people to really be able to discern risks when navigating in online spaces. And I think young people are very digitally savvy, and I think that there are definitely ways to kind of enhance their digital literacy. So they're taught not just to navigate these spaces, but also to critically evaluate the information that they encounter and then make informed decisions about how they engage with that information.
What's your view on AI and how it's impacting on this space? We heard Brett's views just before. Do you share his idea on that, or what more could you share with us on AI and the quality of information that we're getting online?
Yeah, I mean, I think as AI and especially generative AI, large language models are getting better and more advanced, I think it will be increasingly difficult to discern what is generated by humans and what's generated by AI, for instance. So I think it is a concern. I think it is something that we need to be kind of addressing. So I definitely do share Brett's opinions on that matter. Yeah.
Doctors Brett Sutton and Brian Lehan Wong are talking about the impact of technology and mis and disinformation on our health here on RN Drive. Brett, what are some of the more practical tips for people to help identify and discern false information online? I mean, whether that's in the health space or just rather in general, what should parents and carers be looking out for with their young children?
I mean, obviously, there's the general use that parents can look out for. That there are genuine concerns about the way that, especially young people, are using social media that has negative mental health impacts. With respect to mis and disinformation in particular, I think it does go to that issue of digital literacy. And one of the things that is helpful in the space is that if you get a single source of information, especially that only comes through a social media feed, you should try and triangulate that information as much as possible. So what I mean by that is looking for other corroborating sources that validate that information, and also try and get a sense of, and again, this goes to digital literacy, of the trusted sources of information. And social media feeds may have trusted sources of information, but they are absolutely full to the brim of individuals who are pushing a particular product or a particular issue with the explicit purpose of misinforming and disinforming individuals. And so looking to those trusted brands, if you like, or the trusted sources is a really key way to do it. And if you think you're receiving information from a particular individual or source, look for the other ways that you can go to that organisation to make sure that that's the truth. When Oprah Winfrey and Sachin Tendulkar were used to promote various things, they weren't real. And so you can go to those other maybe mainstream news sources to validate the truth behind those stories.
Yeah, the onus with that idea is that it's on the user, the consumer of that information. What about the provider, the social media platforms? How can digital platforms perhaps play a better role in this space? And do you think that there's room for Australian authorities to perhaps control more of what's happening online?
I think there's no question that it's absolutely a collective effort that needs to be made. I think individuals need to arm themselves, absolutely. But those big platforms, they have a very, very significant responsibility in this space, and they are not, in many respects, living up to it. And so, yes, they need to do the right thing. But again, they have very significant commercial interests, sometimes for clicks and interest, that does relate to misinformation being more appealing than the truth sometimes. And, you know, it's up to the Australian Parliament, but I'm sure they will give due consideration to the fact that those media platforms can be very potentially harmful at a population level.
Brian, I'd be keen to get your observations on this. You're a Canadian based in the UK. Are you seeing similar challenges overseas to what we're seeing here play out in Australia?
Definitely. I mean, I think, you know, we're seeing a lot of similarities, and I mean, internationally, you know, different governments we're seeing taking different steps to address things like online safety. I mean, for instance, in the UK, we've introduced the Online Safety Bill, which aims to make the internet safer by requiring platforms to remove illegal content and protect children from harmful material. In Canada, we've got the Digital Charter, which implements standards for companies to handle personal data responsibly and to provide greater transparency to users about how their information is used. And then, you know, we're seeing organizations as well, such as the Five Rights Foundation, which are really influential in shaping policies that then support the rights of young people online. You know, that's in recognition of General Comment 25, which recognizes young people's rights in digital spaces. And the foundation's work has really led to the development of some frameworks that advocate for the digital environment to be designed with the rights and needs of young people in mind, and has influenced some policy discussions and legislative efforts worldwide.
And in the health space, is much innovation happening there to protect against false and misleading information online?
I think there's increasing work being done. I mean, from when I was doing some work with Public Health England, we were doing a lot around infodemic management. We had trainings with WHO and their infodemic management team to kind of do a lot of these social listening efforts to, as Brett was, you know, alluding to, kind of how do you triangulate, you know, the source of that information and kind of verify whether it's true or factual or not. So yeah,
it's interesting, Brett, isn't it? Because when you look at what it befalls us online, it's just so much information. We know that Meta, the owner of Facebook and Instagram, announced a while back that it would no longer pay Australian news organisations tens of millions of dollars each year, saying it won't renegotiate new deals as part of news bargaining codes. What will this do for, you know, accuracy here online and the impact on us as consumers?
I think it's hard to predict in some ways. Obviously, there are a lot of people who would have got their news feeds on Facebook. And so I guess one of the unpredictable elements will be where will those individuals turn. I think there are other social media channels that they might pick up on that may not have trustworthy sources of information at all. But some of them might also go back to a more mainstream news cycle that might actually lift the level a little bit in terms of the accuracy of information. But it's going to be hard to know exactly where people's preferences will turn. I think the general trend, though, is that legitimate news stories with their means of validating the information need to play in the social media space as well, because if it's left to be a complete sewer, then the individuals who get their news through those channels won't have an opportunity to be exposed to the truth, and that'll be really important. And so I think, you know, mainstream news needs to be able to play in the social media space, but also make the case for why the information that they're providing should be trusted and what their credentials are.
Dr. Brett Sutton, Director of Health and Biosecurity at CSIRO, and Dr. Brian Lee-Han Wong, Global Public Health Advisor. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Listen to more great stories that take you beyond.